Could you give us some of your experiences? Where did you first hear about the Peace Encampment?
I read about it it was either the Ithaca Times or the Grapevine. Might have been the Grapevine at the time. It was a local Ithaca free paper. And I saw this little ad for women who were involved in peace work called the Women's Peace Encampment. And I read it, and then I read it again a week later, and then I kept seeing it, and that's where I first decided, I'm going to make a phone call.
Do you remember who was at the camp?
I remember exactly who was.
Tell us about that.
So I made the phone call, and I talked to a woman named Donna. And Donna answered, and I said, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. I'd love to come out to visit. And she's like, great. We picked a kind of a time and a date, and she said, come on out. Awesome. I went out there, and at first it was very quiet. No one was around, and so I went into the house, and I was looking at everything. And then Donna appeared, and she kind of came in full force in the room, and I got to meet her and her guinea pigs, which were there at the time. Whose names escape me right now, but they were weeding away in the corner. And there was another woman there named Valerie. And we, they just, started to ask some questions, and I was asking them questions, and we were talking, and it's just that everything just starts. Everything starts into connecting, and everyone is chatting away. And I guess some time had passed, and we were still, she was piddling around in the house and showing me around the kitchen and the, witch's room, and here we can squeeze out some, herbs and for these tinctures. I was like, cool, we're doing all this. And actually several women might have come in the front door, but there was only one who I remember, and it was Z. And she came like barreling in the front door, and I was like, oh, wow. And it was just like this, and just deep, I felt like just this instant, like deep connection with the place and the women, and with her in particular. And she has been one of my best buds for this whole time.
Do you remember what year that might have been?
It had to be in the late 90s. It was after Transform. It was Transform or Die. I remember one of the first things I was part of was Transform or Transform. So it was.
Okay, so that couldn't be the late 90s.
No, couldn't have been.
It had to be the late 80s.
80s. Well, I'm old. 80s. It would be the 80s, wouldn't it? Okay.
But anyhow,
anywho, it was
going.
Yeah, very.
It's,
late 80s. That would be the late 80s. Yes.
Okay, so
Valerie, Donna was there, and I think shortly, within the next stretch of time, I got to meet you and Anne and Laura and Twilight and just so many women.
Was Phoenix still around at that time? Do you remember?
She was, because I remember her being there and also meeting her in other different situations, in places. Yes,
right,
she was.
I'm trying to pin down when Donna and, the years that Donna was there. And
yeah.
So, all right, this is your first day, and you become quite enthused.
Yes, quite.
Develop an instant, lifelong relationship with Peace Scale.
I was just like, yeah, this is it.
What about it, Kat, helped inspire that attachment in you?
It's the same feeling that when I think about it today that I have. It's the same, that it was just this very deep sense of that balance of comfort and yet like fizziness. That this is really comfortable and this feels really good, and yet there's like that fizziness that goes on with it that keeps you interested, excited, the ups, the downs, the backs, the forth. It was just, I felt just from the beginning, as soon as I, pulled into the driveway, got out of my truck, that sense of, wow, this is just, people talk a lot about the energy of places and what they feel, what that feels like. And I really believe that land and that space has that. I do. It just is, you're infused with everything. And that's the same thing today when I think about it. I get that same feeling of just that infusion of all that stuff, all those conversations, all the discussions, all the relationships, the experiences, all the women. The good, the not so good, everything in between. Rich, very rich. Just felt it.
Prior to reading that little thing in the paper, did you know about the peace encampment
No.
from prior years?
No.
Never heard a thing about it?
No, not a thing, not a thing.
That was your first moment?
It was like, for me, the whole thing was just a transforming experience, I think, because of that. And it really was a doorway for me that radically changed my life. Radically. It was all there, and it just, as some people in the room know.
Had you done activism before you got to the peace camp?
No, not really. No.
So it woke up a whole part of you that hadn't
Yep.
had.
Absolutely. Just no
So-
contact with it prior to that.
So, Kat, did you then go there often?
I did. Yes, I did. And then from that point on, I would go pretty much almost every weekend and help with chores, things that were happening on the land. Many times, often during the week as well, especially through the winter when things were really kind of hard and women needed a lot of support. So I went quite frequently, yeah.
Were there things that you found you were able to bring to the camp, contribute, or were you were getting a great deal? Can you think about what you also were bringing to it?
I think for myself, I brought a very strong willingness to work, to do the things that needed to be done on the land, whether it was like cleaning or organizing or moving things or building things or, just real hands-on labor, shopping for women, taking them places, driving to them where they needed to be, picking things up, taking care of a lot of the chores that needed to happen, and cleaning, organizing, fixing up. So a lot of labor-intensive stuff, but I hope there were other things too.
At what point or by what means did you come to find out what had happened prior to your years being there, had happened on the land and in that space? How did you find out about that?
It, I think, was an interesting process because I really, I felt like there was a lot of discussion. Women would share stories. Most of it came through storytelling. I would probably say 99.9% of it came through just the sharing of stories that women would tell, just off the cuff in this moment, crammed in the car, going to hunt for cronestones at Seneca Lake. Do you remember when, 8 years ago? And then all this would come out at those moments. And then there was this little piece of it that, you felt this sense of knowing that there was all this that happened before. It was everywhere. You couldn't not see it or feel it in just the presence of the land and the earth and the buildings. You knew that so much had happened. I felt it anyway, and that was that piece of it. But most of the other information came through storytelling, sure. And women at the camp love to tell stories. Great storytellers, so there's never shortage of that.
Do you remember hanging out by the fire?
Oh, yeah. Lots. The fire was, that was pretty much, a nightly ritual, no matter how cold it was, even in the chillier evenings. A lot of fire stuff, inside, outside. Sometimes inside, of course, around the stove, but I do remember a lot of times around the fire, building the fire, getting wood for the fire. A lot of stories there, singing, dancing. Yeah.
Oh, tell us about that.
It was this place that you would come together, and again, a lot of stories, drinking tea, whatnot, and women would just start singing and hugging and dancing, and the flames are crackling, and people are dancing and mulling around you, and it just be so cold at your back and so warm up in front. So, yeah.
Had you ever been in women's community before?
No.
Can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you?
It was, wow, very interesting, because, again, on the one hand, it just was awesome, felt great. It was like the best thing in the world. And that it was very challenging because of the models of consensus that we used, which was wonderful and also challenging sometimes.
How challenging?
I think because of, I think it stemmed from a deep respect to want to hear, not just hear, it was more than that. And I think that's always the internal challenges, is it's not just about hearing what other women think, but really trying to understand, what is that? Like, why do I feel this way about that? And you feel that way? Like, where is, just trying to explore that. And I always think that does present some challenges. Not in a bad way, but in a very different way. But living in that community, it also had some incredibly humorous moments, of course, with, okay, what pots can we use for like meat eaters, and what pots, can't we use? And oh my gosh, there's a piece of liverwurst in here in your refrigerator. No, that's the wrong shelf. What are you thinking? This has to go here. And is someone going to, dump the piss bucket? What are we waiting for? It's up to the top. Things like that. So it was like, all right, I'll get it. Falling and slipping in the mud. That was, like dumping it. It was always really one of my favorite things to do. So I love that. Yep. So there were those also challenges of figuring out, how do people live together with very different needs, who have very different needs and desires, and
And how did the reality of this Army Depot intersect with all of this that you're speaking about for you in that time?
It was, the juxtaposition was profound for me, because that's really what it was all about. And I don't know that I was there the second time and someone drove by and they took the picture of the truck and the license plate. It was very interesting, because I heard someone else talk about that on the video, and that happened like first or second day, someone goes slow, takes it. But the sense of that establishment being there was really, it was profound. It just intersected, I think, at every level, because it was really what it was about. It was what, why I came there and what fueled my interest initially. And then, of course, the relationships and with the women certainly kept all that going. What we were trying to do, what we were trying to say, what we hoped would happen by simply being there and doing the work that we were doing. But its presence was oppressive. And not to mention the zapping and all that too, which...
Do mention the zapping. Tell us about what you understood about it at that time.
It was, when we talk about it, their experiences with it, what it felt like, and what happened to their bodies and their psyches as they were experiencing it. And I had that up to that point and hadn't noticed anything particularly different. And one day, we were just sitting around and, talking about something, and all of a sudden there was like this sensation that happened in my body. Like my head was like getting, tight, and this stuff was just kind of going on, and like, what? And I looked around the room, and everyone was having either similar symptoms or ones that were kind of like that, and I was like, oh, that's it. And someone said, they're at it. I'm like, oh, wow. That was, it was amazing. And it wasn't the last time, but I remember that first time so clearly because the response, the feeling I had in my body was not like anything I'd ever felt. And, to that point, it was kind of this mystery that women talked about. I mean, it's a big part of, I think, the experience there. And then it became that reality for me, and it was like, yeah, that's it. And then throughout,
Did that make you think about maybe being there less? Did it, make you frightened at all?
I will tell, it freaked me out big time, but it didn't make me think about being there less, but it did make me think about what we needed to do to protect ourselves a little bit more.
Can you talk a little bit about what women did do?
Women would often, it was great, I mean, because they're so ingenious, knew the best places to sleep. Right? Oh, this is a much better place to sleep because if they do any zapping, you see you've got this wall here and this wall has got like some metal in it, because I ripped that out last year and I saw that had this, and this was a good place to sleep, or this had this nook and this was not a safe, and you definitely don't want to be there because, so there was all this, process and problem solving around, where we could sleep and how we could sleep, and of course, the tinfoil. If people hear this, they think, oh, these women are totally cooked. But it's when you're, hanging out and you're just chatting, you're having a cup of coffee, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, bam. And everyone else is like floored. You're like, no, there's something happening here. I mean, I don't think I was visiting the camp for a week and everything started going haywire on my phone. Everything. Click, 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 all the time. And it started probably a week after I started going to the camp, and it stopped about maybe 2.5, 3 months from when I had pretty much stopped going regularly, and never had the problem since. Never had it before. So something's, there's all sorts of stuff. I think that was kind of going on, for sure. So.
Did you have any emotional or intellectual reaction or feeling about the fact that the U.S. government was doing this?
I did. It was, on like the one hand, incredibly, that personal feeling of how they viewed citizens, us, people, and how little they must think or such total disregard. On that hand, the very personal part of, yeah, this is, you really can't show much more disregard for someone than to say, let's kind of see what this might do to them. Let's see if this will, shoo them out a little bit or get something going. So there's that, and then that's the emotional, right, response. And in my head, I'm thinking, wow, this is like, yeah, this is pretty incredible tool they have here. Weapon, certainly not a tool for good. So that was the intellectual piece of, okay, so if they're doing this here, then this is something that they can also use in other ways and means to, cause disruption and certainly make pretty large groups of people feel totally whacked. And we know, certainly seems like it's been used before. Some other time, so.
Before you came to the camp, had you ever made the connection between militarism and the industrial complex?
Yeah.
You had?
Yeah. When I came, there was like all that, a lot of that for me had already been there. Yeah. So that was not a surprise necessarily, like, oh God, I can't believe our government is, it was more like, man, they're like, but at the same time, there was still that it became a very personal thing then, as I saw the women around me and knew that even the experiences that I had there were nothing compared to what women before me had experienced. So, yeah.
Kat, what, you remain in touch with people from the camp.
Mm-hmm.
Did you maintain relationships with some of those people?
Yes. Do I have to answer that question? Yes, definitely. Well, I mentioned, it's interesting because there was a lot of people I met very in the beginning, people like Z, who just, has been my friend since, it feels like forever, much longer than even that. Aurora. Marshall for quite many years, who was on some of your film clips. And Laura and I, we did a lot of hanging, even way after that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
What is after that? Give me the time frame for you being there and then not being there, what you call it.
The after that would probably be when there was that, the changeover from more political activism, discussion, engagement to what might happen now with the land. Is it, how can it be a place for women to come to and maybe a place for women to live and have more of like a residence feel, and where women could have a place to like settle down and have roots. And so there was that kind of subtle, that shift, that changeover. Or are we going to keep the land? Is it going to be returned to the Cayugas, or is something else going to happen with it, or could we do this with it or that with it? So that's kind of like the after, I guess, in my mind. When I think
And
of
at that point, did you stop being?
For a while, I was still involved. For a while, I was, involved for quite a bit with that. But then as time went, it changed, for me, and I wasn't as involved. Because by the time that I had gotten more involved with the camp, a lot of the amount of actions that were going on had sort of slowed down. But there was one in particular that I thought was very significant. It was a Mother's Day picnic. I don't know if you remember that. I believe you were there. And there was probably about 5 of us. And, we had our signs and we had our little baskets, and we walked, down, through Romulus, and we had, again, the signs. We were waving to people. We had our little picnic basket. And I'm kidding you not, the only intention was to just sit on that little grassy knoll and have a picnic with the sign and the flowers, and we brought all these flowers we were going to, and that was it. There was no other purpose to it except just to do that. And there was like just about 5 of us. We get there, and it was like this onslaught of like vehicles and personnel. They closed the gate, closed the entrance. So all the people who were coming in, it was a work day that we were having the event. It wasn't a weekend that we were having it on. It was during the week. Had to go all the way around to the other
14.
to gate 14. And it was, we sat down and we just ate our food and we had our picnic. We hung out. We were like, this is just amazing. I think it was, I think went to show the level of respect and fear at the same time. They had like, who knows what they're up to? Sure, it looks like there's 5 of them, but thousands of them could come out. And we just sat there. We had our lunch. Everyone came up and they were cursing because they had to drive like 15 miles out of the way to go to the other gate. And we were just, wow, it's pretty cool. We packed up our little picnic lunch after about an hour and went back. That was it, singing and chanting and dancing, and it was nice. But that sort of came to me during the prelude we just had.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting at that point that a lot of the conversation, like even when women were coming to visit, was about re-energizing and making connections between militarism and oppression of women and so on. Do you remember those kinds of things, and
Yeah.
can you talk about that a little
Yeah,
bit?
there were definitely many discussions about that on the small scale and the large scale, how some of the work had changed at the encampment from a lot of numbers. I mean, the number of women who were coming at significantly, narrowed down, and that impacted on the number of actions that were happening, the size of them. But certainly there was always a lot of discussion about the interconnectedness of that in between the personal stuff that was always happening in the lives of the women there and the political spectrum as well, which, looking back on that, it makes a lot of sense, that whole concept that the personal is definitely political, because we'd have these big scale discussions about how, the industrial military complex and all this is going on and what this means and that means, and then have those internal struggles, amongst ourselves, working out, the differences, that you were part of a lot of those discussions and the living arrangements and what was happening, and that same kind of, like, just trying to figure stuff out, how it all just interconnects.
Did you ever have any thoughts about living at the encampment?
I did. I was a weekend liver. It's a part-time liver. I did. I don't know, think what that would be like if it was day in and day out, because I knew so many women who I loved were living there full time as it was. But yeah, I did have thoughts of that. It seems to work for me to have that access of going in and out, though, and being able to help with some of the things that needed to be helped with outside too.
What were some of the challenges to being there at that time, being around that community at that time?
I think the biggest challenge I saw was the conflict between women who held this very clear, focused determination around doing peace work and feminist work, political work, and women who had a very different idea. So you'd have these really very focused political activists, and maybe some women who weren't, or who were dealing with different political activist issues. It could have been numerous things: disability, gender identity. That all certainly was part of that picture of doing peace work and feminist work. But there was always sometimes that tension of how to make that all well together. And so the biggest challenge I saw was those differing energies coming together, and how women were cohabitating there, because women were living there full time, and sometimes there were some conflicts about what issue maybe needed to take precedent, or how someone was infringing upon somebody else's feelings or space or own issues. There was a lot about that.
Do you have any examples of when that was successfully navigated? Or what methods or strategies women employed?
Well, I think that when women were able to enlist support, quite often from outside, from the resources of women who were living off-land at that point, and have them be part of those discussions. This is what I'm feeling. When she's feeling this or that, it impacts on me on this or that way, and how can we negotiate this? It seemed like things would be successful when that would happen, when those bridges were made, kind of getting outside of that space and bringing other women in to get their feedback, or their ideas, or their input on how things could be negotiated in a different way. And it didn't always work. There were some things that just, bang, that was it. But
There were also problems. I mean, there was transiency was one of the big things.
transiency was huge.
There were also women coming to the land who had emotional or mental or financial problems that
Right.
could stress things out.
Right.
Do you remember
I do.
some of that kind of thing
Yeah.
happening? And could you maybe give some of your thoughts on what went on around those issues?
Right. I mean, I do feel like a lot of the time that I was there, a lot of the energy was finding a way to provide a support network for women who were in the throes of very deep emotional trauma. Very serious, very significant, sometimes life-threatening, often maybe dangerous for themselves. And trying always to do it in a way that was respectful of their process and their choices, because there were certainly women who knew what it was they were dealing with, but often chose to maybe take a different path on how to get to their place of healing. Not wanting to use, traditional medications or whatever, or going off them, and trying to be supportive of those choices, and at the same time, how can you as the person who's trying to be that support, help keep them safe and secure, fed and clothed, and still enable that whole structure of the encampment to do the work that it was still doing, and that it was still holding, to be that place where women came together and were being energized and having discussions and trying to figure out the ways that we could still do this work. That was big. I mean, there was a lot of crisis moments with that. There were many crisis moments with that, of racing out, racing back, and taking care of things. And that was pretty intense. It was.
Have you thought at all about why it was that so many women didn't have resources, or that the peace camp attracted so many women who were definitely looking for something,
Right.
but that it wasn't set up to provide.
Right. And I think that was one of the biggest challenges, that it wasn't set up to provide a place for people dealing with the level of that intensity at that. I mean, God knows we've all been there, but it did provide some harrowing experiences for sure. I think that it makes sense to me intellectually and emotionally why women would find that place. I think it's why many women found that place. There is a sanity to it in the midst of the insanity of life, and there is a comfort in that. And I think women would be drawn to a place like the encampment for that very reason. And I think on a practical level, it's so much of our lives already are so fragmented. And if you're dealing with some really deep, profound issues that maybe your family does not understand, or they're fragmented and you're disconnected and it's all disjointed, and it just was the place to be. And I think a lot of women just kind of found it. I didn't necessarily get a sense that they had any knowledge of it necessarily beforehand, but they found that place. Or they might have done some peace work, they might have done some activism work, or they might have been involved in something else, but they heard about it, someone talked about it, and they found it.
Right.
And maybe that's a place where I can just be. And I think for many of them it was, and I think it worked out very well, except in those moments when it didn't.
Right.
It was hard.
Yeah, I think a number of women did come there to do healing work, and
I
that
think so.
sometimes they came with the energy to do it, and sometimes
Yes.
they came
Yes.
needing for other people
To do it.
to support them through it.
Mm-hmm.
And that did make it hard to be there. Not hard to be there. Made you feel sometimes helpless that we couldn't do more.
Yeah.
That we wanted to be that
Yes.
utopian
Right.
place where everybody's needs could be met.
Right.
And so there were times when it sometimes drained us.
I think so. We worked very, very hard.
You know, Kat, I had forgotten how much there were periods of like intensity, and some of it you brought it back to me in some big ways.
There were some, I mean, there were moments where I wasn't sure some of the women there were going to make it, where they were, really on the edge of destruction, internally, imploding. And it was pretty frightening. And one individual would be, but we had several. And it was
Right.
quite often juggling opposing needs, and very, strong personalities, strong women, very strong individuals, very intense.
Right.
Were you a part of the Peaceland Collective?
I mean, I remember being there for a lot of discussions. Yes, I say
Initially.
yes. When it became more of a yeah.
Yeah.
Clear as mud. I am. Yes.
At what point, what was going on for you when you became less involved with goings-ons on the land?
I think there was a lot of things that were happening in my life. To put it mildly, at that time that took a lot of my energy away from outside and really became focused internally, that I needed to put pretty much all my energy into. That required me to be pretty focused, and so that it's not like it really took me on a different path. It just moved me in a different place on that path that just needed me to step away and do what I needed to do.
And were any of the relationships that you had with women at the encampment, away from the camp, were they a part of that internal process?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think that it formed certainly my web of community, absolutely, and that didn't change, that didn't stop, that didn't get left behind, and that, I mean, a whole bunch of them were here just, a few minutes ago, Aurora and, oh gosh, Arrow. I mean, we definitely continued our connections, and that was just brilliant. Mm-hmm.
And when what was your last visit to the Peace Encampment land? Do you remember when was the last time you were there?
It's funny because I was thinking about that the last few days, like because the first, moments I remember, just so clearly, those first images and sensations. I remember like squeezing the tinctures out and, seeing Z and seeing Donna and Valerie and you and all these other, folks, and Anne, like waiting to meet Anne. I was like, oh, who's Anne? I gotta meet Anne. All I kept hearing about was, wait till you meet Anne Herman. And like, whoa, there's Anne. I don't remember the last time. I don't remember those last moments.
Do you have any sense
Oh,
about
wait.
the moment came?
Oh, maybe I do remember. I could just, something came back to me there. I don't remember the last time. Do you remember the last time?
I can't pinpoint the last time, although I have to say that we did have some some of those last conversations were pretty intense.
Uh-huh.
One in particular, I don't know if I should.
Then I'm sort of remembering.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think I'm remembering. It was a playful time.
It was playful,
It was
and we were
playful.
considering other ways of,
That's right. That's right. Boom. That's it. Different. I do remember. I was really so focusing on all the other stuff that I forgot about all that. I do. I remember some of the last conversations we had were the way women could have different friendships. That there are many different ways that we can engage with each other, and there's also ways that women can have friendships where there can be a lot of closeness and intimacy that doesn't necessarily have to be sexual.
We were just having a conversation earlier.
on the other hand, what could be sexual that
That's
didn't
right.
have to have any strings attached.
That's right, exactly. And there could still be a lot of closeness and cuddling and stuff.
I can still see, this is your, like, do you remember this? This was, you used to love, you'd sit there with your hand.
Yeah, I don't know why I used to do that.
Yeah, you
know,
used
I
to
still
do that. I can still see you, I can still see the conversation. I'm so comfortable. It's so comfortable to me.
Okay, this is going to come out so. You should see the look on her. Oh my God, I wasn't doing anything bad. That's just a
It was
place.
just a little thing.
Just kind of right down the belly.
Yeah. It was
No.
really comforting. I'm sorry. I think we
I have
have
to sleep with my hands right here at night. I have to.
Mm-hmm.
I can't go to sleep unless my hands are right here.
But that's right. That was sort of the last. And the energy there was it was beautiful though.
Yeah.
There were, children were there, and it just seemed like there were a lot of more women there, and all this was. It just seemed like that there were brightness to it. It was a brightness to it.
Yeah.
Gosh, I think when you said it was the last time, I was thinking of, yeah,
What time, do we know what time we're talking about?
nighttime. No, I think
Put your hand on your belly.
Yeah, my hand on my
Give me
belly.
more detail.
that.
Fall, early winter.
Are we in the 90s now?
I don't even
I think
know.
so.
Because
I was in the 90s when I started. We're in the 90s.
Oh, yes.
We
no.
had to be in the
No,
90s.
you were in the late 80s.
I was in the late 80s. This had to be
This is
going on
90s.
in the 90s. It probably had to be around
And by then,
92-ish, I bet.
yeah, very
So the fall of
likely.
'92 was sort
Well,
of
did
your
we do Thanksgiving
twilight
that year? Were we doing Thanksgiving? You might have been there longer than that, but I do remember a Thanksgiving where my daughter and grandchildren
Yes,
came.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. That's right.
At the Peace Encampment?
Uh-huh.
Peace and
Yeah,
Cat, yeah.
That was nice.
Uh-huh.
That was, I remember that.
So you were still coming during that point?
Yes.
So that would be the fall of '92?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then,
Yes.
And so you never, so say if we sort of pinned it down to around that time was some of your last time there, after that, did you come back to the camp?
Probably sporadically, but not regularly.
To just
No, probably the early 90s then would be, 92,
right,
93.
93 possibly.
Possibly.
Even, and then there was still interaction, I think. I mean, because we were coming.
Yes, we had our.
So, yeah, so then it's hard to remember the rest of it.
Probably there was still a lot of commuting back and forth, and we were having our conversations and discussions and.
Coming to Ithaca,
Yep.
I was coming to Ithaca maybe more.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And things were maybe, and things, were pretty quiet, pretty quiet.
I think they were at that time. A lot it sort of had turned.
Yeah.
Turned, what do you,
I think it's that what we were just talking about, some of the situations prior to that had maybe been very draining on the support network, had changed. A lot of some of the women who were really struggling and dealing with some pretty significant, intense issues had moved on to different places and chosen different options for themselves. And then there was...
And maybe by then we had also come up with that women who came to the land needed to be, what was it, mentally, emotionally, and financially self-supporting.
Self-supported, self-reliant.
Self-reliant,
I mean, within, of course, a huge net,
Right,
very, right. And that, because you were there and Ann was there, so things had changed in that.
Yeah,
And-
by then we had made that kind of a little bit of, we needed to be concerned about that, to make
Right.
sure that people were not ending up
Yeah.
being stuck at the peace camp with no way to get out of there, with no funds to allow them to
Right.
to leave.
Right. Or in serious distress and needing
Right.
really help.
Right.
I mean, medical attention or whatever it might be. 'Cause
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember how you found out that the land had been sold for back taxes? Or do you know that?
I did not know that. And until I read the thing, and I was like, whoa. I'm like, no, that can't be possible. I have that little letter somewhere that says, you own the land, the mortgage has been paid, and stuff that you like had given to me, Laura. And she's like, I've had enough. You're going to do the secretary stuff. Here's...
I couldn't remember who took it over from me. I just remembered I stopped it.
You stopped after 90 years of doing it, yes.
So I said in the circle, I said, okay, who wants the checkbook?
And I don't even know if I said yes. I didn't know that until I was reading the materials, and it was
So just now you're talking about.
the last few days, yeah. I mean, I had my feeling that might, happen just based on the struggles of keeping, raising money for the taxes and stuff.
Did you have any,
Having been someone who helped pay taxes.
did you have any thoughts when you heard it, emotional reaction?
Yeah.
Tell us.
It broke my heart. Just felt just broke my heart.
Tell us.
I think that, the way that my brain kind of works with things is, I do believe that there is, that the earth and the ground holds stuff, that it holds energy, that there is, that place had it. And I felt it every time I stepped on the land, and I think it's still there. And it just breaks my heart that it's not a place that we can go back to. That's why, because it's all there. You asked earlier, like, how did you know about the history and the herstory of the women before and how we found that information? It was like, yeah, I was like, oh, all the discussion, all the storytelling, but there's that part that just you felt. Like I knew it. Just and that's just heartbreaking to me. That's a loss. It's a tremendous loss.
She needs a hug.
Oh, okay.
There's my girl.
Well, that made me think about who you were when you first went to the camp and who you were kind of towards.
Oh, jeez.
Had you changed much?
Yeah. Yeah. You know the answer to that question.
She's asking if you're
Posterity. Yeah. I had, yes. Internally, externally,
Physically?
physically. So many, well, it was Yeah, everything changed. Everything changed. Yeah. Do you want me to be more explicit?
Why, certainly.
We have about a minute left on this tape, just so you know when it clicks out like it doesn't.
Okay. Well, it was the whole process, from this younger woman trying to figure things out to, it was my whole coming out process, as a lesbian, the whole thing. I think also as a person, it also was on the cusp of, for me, also dealing with other family of origin issues and other things that, my own demons there. So, different person.